Welcome to Interactive Storytelling. I have spent much time on the narrative paradox and its possible solutions. It's now a high time to see some real-world implementations of interactive storytelling platforms. I have selected 12 platforms that I want to present here. Apart from the first one, I won't go deeper into the details of their implementation. If you're interested in finding out more, please see the list of references at the end of this video. Also, there are links to relevant websites and video examples in the description of this video. What were my inclusion criteria for the dozen platforms you're about to see? Firstly, I focused on platforms made during this millennium. There are older ones. Some story-generating systems date back to the 1970s, but their relevance and availability aren't so good. As interesting as they are in their own right, I won't talk about systems like Tailspin, Ani, Ractor, Universe, Minstrel or Brutus. This leads to my second criterion. The platforms presented here are available in some form or another. For some, it could be in the form of a source code, for others in the form of an application. For many platforms, the only available information is textual descriptions in academic publications, possibly with a screenshot or two. Again, this doesn't make them less important, but it does make it difficult to get a clear picture what they can do and what they can't do. Of these platforms, I like to give an honorable mentions to Saga, Opiate, Vibes, Passage, ISRST, and Logtel R. The third criterion is that I haven't excluded neither platforms intended for academic research purposes nor commercial platforms. However, they fall neatly along my crude chronological order so that the academic platforms are at the beginning and the commercial ones at the end. An obvious place to start this review is Facade by Andrew Stern and Michael Matthias, released in 2005. For many, it's still the best example of what interactive storytelling could be about. It was also a culmination of the work started on the OS project and the author-centric approach. In Facade, the interactor plays the role of a close friend of Trip and Grace, a couple whose marriage is in trouble. The events take place at Trip's and Grace's home, which is represented in first-person perspective. The interactor can move around and examine the objects in the apartment. Interaction with Trip and Grace includes a set of gestures such as hug, smile, and kiss, and type in utterances in English. Looking a bit deeper, Facade comprises a series of social games that are divided into 3 sections. The first one is a zero-sum affinity game, which tries to get the interactor to agree with either Trip or Grace. In the second section, the characterization is increased through a therapy game, and the interactor learns more about the couple's marital history and the problems that Trip and Grace have been having from the viewpoint of the character that the interactor agreed with in the first section. Finally, the third section leads to a dramatic conclusion. The play can also be incomplete and end, for instance, the interactor being thrown out by Trip. The system structure is based on discretizing the time into beats. A beat is the smallest unit of value change, which is basically a pair of action and reaction. The story comprises a dozen of scripted and relatively linear scenes, and the system tries to steer the situation towards one of them. One way to increase the range of meaningful interaction is the broad and shallow approach, which was used already in the OS project. The idea is that a system should be broad in the sense that all necessary features have an implementation, and shallow in the sense that some features could have been performed better. For example, characters can act believably, but not necessarily intelligently, in a wide range of situations. Facade uses the broad and shallow approach in handling the textual utterances typed in by the interactor. The interactor's input is mapped into one of 19 possible discourse acts. It doesn't matter what the interactor has actually typed, the system handles only these 19 inputs. For example, utterances hello, hi, and good evening are all mapped to the discourse act greet. Utterances like sorry, I'm sorry, I apologize, and such are mapped to the discourse act apologize. And utterances like how are you doing? How do you feel? What's going on? Are you okay? And such are mapped to the discourse act ask to share intimate thoughts. If the system can't map the utterance to any other discourse act, it's mapped to can't understand. To recap, no matter what the interactor types in, the system handles it as one of these 19 discourse acts. After that, the system maps the discourse act to a character response. Depending on the context, some discourse acts can have a larger set of responses to choose from. For others, the set can be much smaller. This is the idea behind the broad and shallow approach. If the interactor keeps within the context of the drama and focuses on finding out more about Trips and Crazy's marital problems, the more content is available to the interactor. But if the interactor veers away from the main track, the less there are possible responses and the shallower they get. Virtual Storyteller is a multi-agent framework with plot generation developed by Human Media Interaction at the University of Twente since the early 2000s. It places a special focus on natural language generation and the presentation by an embodied agent. The platform is based on principles of emergent narrative. There is no predetermined plot, but characters are autonomous and their life is simulated in a given story world. The result from the simulation gives a particular event sequence that can be then used as a basis for generating and presenting a narrative text. A human interactor can take part in the simulation by taking over the role of one of the characters. Although Virtual Storyteller is no longer being actively developed, its source code is publicly available for downloading. The development of Skinjo began in the mid-2000s, and it's currently being developed in the Rhein-Main University of Applied Sciences. It's a platform for experiencing emerging dialogues and conversations between both computer-controlled and human-controlled characters. This is achieved by connecting everybody in a conversational loop that is controlled by a so-called dramatic advisor. One example of this conversational loop is a case where a human interactor acts as a moderator in a debate between two computer-controlled characters. For each turn, the dramatic advisor receives utterances from the characters and the interactor and selects one to be played and reacted by everyone in the next turn. Fear Not aims at teaching school children how to handle cases of bullying. The interactor could be, for example, the one being bullied or a bystander witnessing bullying. The underlying Fatima platform, shortened from Fear Not Affective Mind Architecture, is an agent architecture driven by cognitive appraisal, where the characters focus on both problem solving and assessing other characters' emotions. ASAPS, or Advanced Stories Authoring and Presentation System, developed by Advanced Stories Group at the Georgia Institute of Technology, is used for teaching how to author interactive stories and studying the authoring process itself. It uses a bottom-up approach where the author has access to building blocks and combines them into an interactive story. Prom Week, developed by Expressive Intelligence Studio at the University of California, Santa Cruz, and released in 2012, focuses on the interactions of high school students during the prom week. It has a dynamic story world populated with numerous characters. The characters can have 5,000 different social interactions, such as who likes who and how much, and the direction of the relationships. Prom Week uses Comme-il-faut platform, which relies on the character-centric approach. There's no fixed narratives, but the platform enables the designer to set down high-level rules that controls characters' expected behavior in different situations. In other words, it tries to make the characters behave appropriately in a given social context. Nothing for Dinner, developed by MediLab team at the University of Geneva and released in 2015, aims at training how to support stroke patients' family and loved ones. In this interactive drama, the interactor takes the role of a teenager whose family member is suffering from a stroke. Active participation enables the interactor to observe the consequences of their actions. The underlying platform, ID Tension, developed by Nicolas Silla, uses the author-centric approach. It includes a narrative logic for manipulating the story world by adjusting the character's goals and actions and the object's states on a higher level, and a narrative sequencer for organizing the successive dramatic action for the interactor to perceive and react. Cyborg is an ongoing open source project led by Chris Crawford. Crawford has been developing interactive storytelling systems since the early 1990s. Because his preceding system, Storytron, turned out to be too complex to understand and to use, the design philosophy for Cyborg is clarity and simplicity. For the designer, this means, for example, a reduced set of parameters and attributes to choose from, and a symbolic language for carrying out communication with the interactor. Twine, created by Chris Klimas in 2009, is an open-source platform for creating interactive fiction, which can be then published in the HTML format. It doesn't require knowledge of programming, which is why it has gained popularity among scriptwriters for creating, for example, interactive television programs and movies. Versu was a platform that was launched by Linden Labs in 2013 and discontinued in 2015. It aimed at making it possible to create and distribute interactive stories, such as Emily Short's Blood and Laurels. Versu allowed strong character autonomy, but had a drama manager that suggests actions and tweaks the character's desires. The overall idea was to create an ecosystem where stories would be available for the public. Episode is a platform for creating and distributing digital stories, launched in 2013. The idea of an ecosystem of user-created stories is similar to what Versu tried to offer. Episode's graphical user interface and ready-made assets has made it popular, and its ecosystem offers nowadays over 150,000 stories. This popularity hasn't gone unnoticed, and there are other similar kind of platforms, such as Choices, Stories You Play, by Pixelberry Studios, launched in 2016, and series Your Story Universe by Universal Studios, which was launched in 2018 and discontinued in 2019. Ink is an authoring system developed by Inkle Studios, which they have used in their own games such as 80 Days and Heaven's Vault. It can be used to create standalone web pages or to provide a story engine for Unity. This is the last platform that I mentioned here. There are many others that didn't make the cut to be included in my list. Please don't get mad if your own favorite wasn't mentioned. Also, my descriptions for the systems were rather rudimentary. If you want to know more, please see the description of this video for a list of links to the platforms as well as a list of video examples. Before we finish, let's take one quote from the year 1978. Alan Kay, Adolf Goldberg and Larry Tesler envisioned then the possibilities of the personal computer in the 1980s, giving the following example. Imagine a James Bond movie in which you can variously be the hero, villain, and bystander, whose plot is fluidly controlled by decisions you make in the course of its action, all presented in real-time full color. Your family and friends can assume roles also. The outcomes will be the result of all your decisions. All of this and all of the variations of this theme that you can imagine will be possible and inevitable just a few years from now. In many regards, their vision has become reality. But looking back at the 12 platforms that we just saw, I'm not so sure that we have achieved that goal quite yet. This is the end of the third set of videos, which focused on the platform. In the fourth set, we turn our eyes to the second partaker, the designer. See you there.